Hey, this is the AlterTricks podcast, where we discuss all things Alteryx, from learning to the Alteryx community to even interviewing some important people in the Alteryx world, all to help you in your journey to becoming a better Alteryx developer.
Hi, I'm Chris Goodman, and I'm an Alteryx ace and innovator.
And I'm Joshua Burkow, also an Alteryx ace and innovator.
Welcome to AlterTricks.
So Joshua, thanks
Good.
for that intro. So do you want to just explain kind of the Alteryx origin story for the website, and I guess the kind of where the genesis of that was, which I think was one of your blog posts or two of your blog posts actually that are probably the most liked on Alteryx community.
Right. So that's really where it came from, was this idea that I was just thinking deeply about, okay, what are Alteryx experts? What do they do? How are they really experts? And I kept pounding the question about, is it just that they know more about the tools? Like if you look at Marquee Crew or some of these guys that have been around doing it for a while, like do they just happen to know more tools? And after talking to him many times and others, it wasn't about the individual tools. It was the fact that they had these patterns that were just cemented in their brains. And so when he would show me a workflow, for example, and anybody, for example, would show how they built something, and I say, okay, how do you parse HTML, for example, or how do you filter out many different fields all at the same time? It was never a tool by tool situation. It was all like, oh well, I just put these 3 tools together, or I put these 4 tools together. And after a while, you kind of like, you realize quite simply that it's just a pattern. And so then this concept of design pattern, which is really common across all the programming languages, even software architecture, and there's some pretty nominal books out there that talk about design patterns, that came out. And so I just started thinking about those. I honestly don't think we've even hit the surface of it. The first 2 blog posts, the first one came out in October of 2019, and it just had 5 design patterns that I knew were really, really common, and that a lot of people that I had talked to had them there. And then that blog post just went crazy, and Alteryx loved it, and got a lot of good feedback from users, and a lot of people said, hey, this was an aha moment. Just a lot of good feedback, which felt good. But like more so, I know that I was hitting the vein of something. Like I was onto a topic that really makes sense to people, isn't too abstract and out there, but really makes sense. And so I followed it up with another blog in January of this year, 2020, and that one just hit it out of the park as well, and just got a lot of good feedback. So really, that idea that people connected with it, and that it made sense that they could take a workflow or a concept that they had working on, and understand it not to be a group of tools, but to be a pattern that they could use over and over again, was pretty important.
Yeah, and obviously we started talking, I'm trying to think, June, July time of this year, 2020.
Yeah. Time flies.
Feels like with COVID and all of that sort of thing, that it's just been forever almost. And we've talked a lot about sort of design patterns. I know kind of within the ACE community, we've kind of talked about design patterns. And I think one of the things we've talked about is how a design pattern's a bit different to a macro. Like sometimes you might want to package up 3 or 4 tools, put them in a macro, and then kind of just say to users, just drag this in and it will just do something for you. But I think one of the great bits about design patterns is it's different because users can understand what's happening to that data throughout. And I kind of see it more as you just learn these design patterns, and kind of when you build out a workflow, it's kind of almost you can put those tools in and know what the data is going to be at the end of that without having to hit the run button. Like I just find myself kind of going, okay, I don't know, a cross tab, or sorry, a transpose, do some stuff, and then a cross tab. I just put those tools in, and I might build out kind of 4 or 5 tools and just hit run, and I know what's going to happen at the end. And that to me is what makes a design pattern.
Yeah, exactly. So the one of the key things that I've been thinking about, and I'm still, I mean, there's so much, it's like an onion here, right? The design patterns is really an onion that there's going to be layers and layers that come off of it. But one of the main things is macro is pushing a potential design pattern into a black box. And what happens there is you have this you set of tools that are connected to each other. That's great. But it's inside of a macro that you're forcing it to be one instance of a design pattern, right? Where if you think about it being outside of a macro and being, the 5 tools that you see, you have a multitude of different variations of the configurations of those individual tools. So for example, I have these 5 tools that are helping me to filter across many fields. But what happens if I want to modify that design pattern to not pick one field? Maybe there's one field I don't want to be filtered by chance. I can modify that design pattern. I have to open up the macro, modify the macro, save it, maybe save it as a different instance. Like, it becomes too problematic. So there are situations where it makes a whole lot of sense to bundle it into a macro, and I'm a huge advocate, I know you are, but like there's other use cases where that design pattern needs to have the flexibility to operate and to move around. Over time, what we're going to see is we're going to see that more and more people realize that if you need to do a certain objective, if you need to accomplish that objective by saying, hey, I have 200 fields or 50 fields or 2,000 fields, it doesn't matter. We can apply the same design pattern to solve that problem, meaning filtering that. So the expansion of the data set or the change of the data set will not change the design pattern. The design pattern says, hey, if I want to filter out many different fields, I can do it these 3 tools or 4 tools.
Yeah, right? And I think that actually is a really good point in terms of the repeatability of a workflow for a different data set. Kind of, you can quite easily get into a situation where you just solve for the current data that you've got, and you don't think, oh, what happens if a new row appears in my data or a new field appears? Like, what do I do with it? Whereas, those sort of things with design patterns, we've talked in the past about kind of things like lots of people will use things like text to columns tool, and they'll split to columns. And it's like, well, actually, if you split to rows and you've got a record ID there as well, and you might do some other bits, you can turn that into a design pattern. And like you say, it doesn't matter if you've got 20 or 2,000 fields. Once you've kind of transferred your data around or kind of put it in text to rows, you can then do so much more, and it doesn't matter what your data looks like coming in.
Totally agree. So I kind of put, in our thinking about this, the 3 things that I am currently thinking about design patterns is really effectiveness, efficiency, and reliability. So effectiveness means that it works substantially well. Like it's not, if I give it 2,000 records or 2,000 columns, it's still going to operate within the same parameters, right? And it works every time, right? Then the efficiency is that it's going to be, it's going to be built in a way or runs in a way that is efficient. It's not using all the resources. It's not going to bog down the system, in the sense that it's doing something in a non-efficient manner, in a way that's not going to, I got to think about the exact words I'm trying to say here, but like it's not going to be in a way that could be done better, right? It can't be done more efficient. So I'm kind of looking for that optimal efficiency. And then the reliability is that, what happens if we add a column? What happens if we add rows? What happens if the data coming in is different in one way or another? Does that design pattern still apply? And there's going to be arguments, and there's going to be talk about what makes that a good design pattern or not. But I think what my current day thought is that over time we will see we'll see hundreds and hundreds of design patterns come. But what we will see is for the main problems that people have, filtering records, parsing HTML, those type of things that happen, we will find multiple design patterns, but we will start to find design patterns that are more efficient, more reliable, more effective than others.
Yeah, and the other bit, I think, kind of like linking it all in with the AlterTricks like blog website, is I kind of want to pitch it that our target audience is that kind of beginner to intermediate level. Like, essentially, people can pick up Alteryx really quickly, and like we talked about it in our first podcast of like people's Alteryx journey. But people start plateauing, and I think kind of things like design patterns are the things that really accelerate people's use of the tool, and actually being able to go, okay, I get this, I can do it quick, I can kind of roll these sort of things out. And I kind of want the blog to essentially be that sort of encouragement and resources, because we're going to cover some other areas on the blog in terms of like how to become an Alteryx expert, and you've got that learning journey, there'll be a plateau and there's a bit of a hump, and you need to get that over that hump, and it's things like design patterns that are going to do that.
I really like, to me, that was the most immediate benefit of design patterns, was that you can really just overnight, you can go from thinking about tool to tool to tool to thinking about progressions of tools. And so you build workflows faster. You are able to start thinking ahead of your workflow instead of being kind of slave to that tool at every point, because and it's to be expected. So there's no fault here. It's just tactics and strategies on how to kind of build a little bit faster, build a little bit more effective, and to know that, you know, one of the things that a lot of people do, and I know you and I have done it, we probably still will do it, is when you get to a point where you're not really sure about what's happening in the workflow, what happens really is you start going down these different rabbit holes. You try these, right? Because you just won't know everything. Just like, you know, a lot of us have attributed to, is the fact that you can't possibly know every little combination when we're talking about data that's dirty and unpredictable. So you might need to go down those rabbit holes. Now, but think about this for a second. If you know these design patterns and you know where those will take you, you know that if you go down the rabbit hole, you're going to be more effective. You're going to be able to come up with solutions that say, hey, I need my data to look like this. Well, guess what? I know 2, 3, 4 different design patterns that will get it from where my data is now, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing with design patterns, just thinking back to a weekly challenge I was doing last week, I think actually, they can be almost like simple things, like passing information. Like one of the things I use quite often is like essentially a replace string, like find a pattern in my data and replace that with a pipe delimiter, because pipe delimiters don't really occur that frequently in the data. So I know that's an easy way to pass something out. Like if you're like,
perfect example,
you probably cover it on like your HTML parsing one, but like you can find particular tags and just say, every time you find this tag, split to rows and then split to columns, and repeat that over and over. And just kind of something you said earlier about strategy and like looking ahead, just only because I've been watching it on Netflix recently, kind of made me think of Queen's Gambit and sort of making it be like chess, of being able to like not like take the data and it's not thinking about what's my next move. It's like, well, what's my move 2 or 3 down the line, kind of, because I know where the data is going to be.
Right. Well, it's funny because I just listened to Chris McAlevy's podcast on Alteryx today, and he literally brought that up, and that hit me like a ton of bricks, was that Alteryx is kind of like chess, right? Is that there's all these different moves, but there's, even more importantly, is like there's layers and layers that you won't realize until, you know, you've been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years. And then you realize, you know, all these pieces come together and you're like, oh, this is an amazing strategy, or this is a great way to think about it. You know, and just to make it really practical for people, lot of people build workflows day in, day out, and they spend hours. Good. There's no problem there inherently. But there's this thing called cache, for example, that you can cache your workflow. I know many people who build their workflows, and every time they run it, they're waiting 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Perfect strategy where you put a cache on there. You cache those tools where you can. That speeds up your development and incrementally, right? If you're developing and you have to wait 5 minutes every time, and say you have to run that thing 200 times or 100 times, that's 500 minutes, right? Like the amount of time that you can save just in development is mind-boggling. But we got to get in those practices. We got to get in that pattern and use those strategies to be effective. And over time is where they really, really build up and provide value.
Yeah, I know when they brought caching into workflows, I'll have to look back what version that was, probably 2018 something. I think kind of, obviously there was a tool previously, but being able to do it directly in the workflow, I was like, this is going to save me so much time. And then kind of like newer features, like being able to filter in the browse tool, I'm like, so many times I've run a workflow, gone, oh, I want to see where that record is. Let's put a filter tool in. Let's search for that record, run it. Oh, it's not there. It's there. And
right.
Now it's
these are design patterns. I mean, these are design patterns at their core. Like it's just a step or 2 steps or 3 steps to do something in a repetitive manner. And all the cache data is doing really is outputting to YXDB. It's just doing it in a slick way. But I think like people over time are going to use a bunch of tools over and over again. And the more fluent they are with that tool, that tool set or that group of tools, the more effective they are. And so that's really where the core of design patterns sits, is that you're becoming more effective because you're able to go through and put a tool down, put another tool, and you know that those 3 tools in your head really act like one tool. There's 3 on the canvas, but you know exactly what's going to come on the output of that. So I think like the comment here is that there's a lot to be uncovered. There's a lot to be discussed still. You and I are putting down a whole bunch of ideas and thoughts around this. And design patterns is just getting started in the context of Alteryx. I think I'm really interested to see what people come up with and how they kind of evolve and grow it. I mean, the question is still out there, is like, what makes a design pattern more or less efficient than another one, or more effective than another one? And how does that evolve? I mean, right now there's no mechanism in place, the community, our blog or whatever, that can put different design patterns up against others, right? So it's really, at the end of the day, it's kind of an individual effort. Is like, you and I developing all day long, we put 3 tools out there, we get a response, and then we do it a slightly different way and we get a different response, and we're kind of like, well, this other one is better, right? And so we kind of tag onto that. But that's got to evolve, right? There's got to be some work and kind of conglomeration of all those design patterns to figure out really what's the better one.
Yeah, and actually, something you just said there made me think something new. Actually, is we need to look across the other tools as well. Like kind of day in, day out, I'll just kind of always have Alteryx open, but actually need to look at things like coding languages, because actually some stuff that you see in Python you can do just like with one like function, and it's like, well, what's that one function actually doing? Can that be a design pattern? Like, is there something that you would kind of convert and sort of say, actually, yes, you might need a few more tools, but that's what that fundamentally is doing. And it's getting to that position as well. I think it'd be interesting to look across and say, what do some of the other tools do, coding languages do better than we can do in Alteryx in terms of like data prep, data cleanse, and that sort of thing, and go, actually, there's probably a better way that we could do it as well. So we can kind of explore that as well.
Exactly. I think you're spot on, because as you see more of the coder backgrounds and a lot more of the programming backgrounds come into play in Alteryx, and there's, every day I hear more and more people that have that background come in, especially when they're doing a lot of the SDK development, the HTML SDK, Python SDK, you're going to get that mindset coming. And most of those programming languages, the C sharps and .NETs and Python developers, Java developers especially, like they're built on design patterns. Like design patterns are almost core to programming and object-oriented programming. And so they're going to filter in and they're going to bring hopefully their thoughts about that, where they'll probably bring it in via their development for HTML macros and Python macros and that sort of thing. But don't be surprised if you start to, those programmers are thinking in design patterns, thinking in those models, and applying that to a workflow. And whether it's within Alteryx, within a Python tool, R tool, or within, embedded within an SDK macro, it's still going to be there. And so either way, we're improving the thought process, the underlying framework of how do you develop effective, efficient, reliable workflows that last, right? That don't get put up on an Alteryx server and only last a month because the data changed, or because the user that built them left and it needs to tweak. I mean, those things should stand the relative test of time, right? And so, like, just to make it clear, like, we blog about this. We're going to blog about this a lot in the coming days, weeks, and months. And then we also like the idea of just having users submit their design patterns, because it'll be great to get those up on the blog, get people to see them, comment, understand design patterns, and get them out there so that they can kind of be talked about and argued about and improved on. I mean, I think that'll be pretty powerful.
It's also going to help us because I think we've probably got a list of definitely 10s, 20s of design patterns, and it'll just take us time to get through. So if anyone else wants to kind of go, oh, I've got some design patterns and want to write them up, like, we'll post them. And
right. I do put this in the bucket of a nice problem to have, is that I've gotten reached out by many people that said, hey, I've got a design pattern. I loved your blog. Hey, I got one here too. Maybe you could post about it. And oh, what do you think about this one? This is one I use all the time. And that's really refreshing, because I always kind of start this off that I was kind of worried that I was in a little bit of la la land and thinking that I was a little crazy, which debatable, right? But the idea that I'm not is really refreshing, and really kind of, I feel good about it, that there's a lot of other people that are thinking like this, that say, you know what, there are design patterns and there's plenty of them. So we'll have to keep posted and see how this thing plays out. I'm super excited about it.
Cool. Guess we can wrap up there.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, good one.
Thank you for watching. Click here to watch more and here to subscribe.